Elite sprinters train to perform at their absolute peak in championship finals. So why is it that we sometimes see them perform better in the prelims than in the final? In some cases, it can be due to fatigue or inexperience, but when the athlete makes qualifying for the final look effortless, then struggles to even match that time in the final, there are other factors at play. When an athlete is facing off against competition that isn't on their level, the race can feel more like a training run to them, so they end up running in the same manner as they do in practice and finish with a time that they expected to run. It's quite common for sprinters to mention how the times that they've ran in training are even better than the quickest times they've managed to run in an official race.
Do you think you can get to that physical state to beat your PBs?
Oh, 100%. If I don't run faster than I've run, I'll be gutted.
Really?
I've done a lot faster in training. I've got numbers in my mind which I think I can achieve, and because I've done them in training consistently. If I don't run at least 9.8 for the 100 meters, if I don't run 19.7 or below for the 200 by the end of my career, which might not happen, but it should happen because I've done it in training. But it doesn't matter. Doing it in training doesn't mean anything. You have to do it when it matters, and I haven't done that. A lot of athletes are like that. A lot of athletes have those periods where they've done a lot faster in training.
This seems contrary to the idea that athletes run their fastest in front of big crowds, because the adrenaline from the crowd at a big race is something that can't be replicated at practice. But it can depend on the athlete whether they run their best under no pressure or run their best when all eyes are on them. Noah Lyles in particular says that the atmosphere from the crowd is something that he feeds off, which boosts his performance, so it would be understandable for him to run his best on the big occasions rather than in training. When an athlete is a clear favourite to win a race and they've jumped out to a lead well before the finish line, they will often run the remainder of the race in a manner that looks effortless. When looking back over races where certain athletes won with ease, there are a number of semi-final performances that I'd like to highlight. The first is Erjan Knighton's run in the semi-final of the Tokyo Olympics. In this race he ran a time of 20.02, and he did this while turning his head multiple times, which isn't something he would be doing if he was concerned about losing the race. It was quite evident that he wanted to keep tabs on where his competitors were, so he knew what was required from him to finish first, without overexerting himself before the final. At this time, Knighton had a personal best of 19.84, so given that he made his semi-final performance look so effortless, you would expect he could run at least 0.2 seconds faster in similar conditions in the final. But it turned out he only managed to run 0.09 seconds faster in the final, and we're going to look at what might have been the reason. In the semi-final, Knighton has 4 other athletes ahead of him when he reaches the 100 metre mark, which shows he is running a conservative first 100 metres. In the final, however, there are only 2 athletes ahead of Knighton at the 100 metre mark, despite him facing a tougher field, which shows he changed his race strategy in the final to run harder in the first 100 metres, which left him with much less energy for the second 100. In the semi-final, he ran his own race, but in the final he tried to keep up with everyone in the field, which led to the second part of his race suffering. Usain Bolt said that before the 200 metre Olympic final in 2012, he told his fellow countryman Warren Weir to run his own race rather than trying to keep up with him, and this worked out for him as he took the bronze medal in a time of 19.84. With DeGrasse, Bednarik and Lyles to contend with in Tokyo, Knighton may not have been able to make it into third place, even if he managed optimal race execution. But with only 2 of the big guns to contend with at the 2022 World Championships, Knighton this time managed to finish in third place to take bronze. Knighton ran a time of 19.80 in the final, but this time his final performances were actually slower than his semi-final time of 19.77, the same time Kenny Bednarik ran to take the silver medal in the final. Speaking of athletes who ran a faster time in the semi than in the final, in the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona, Mike Marsh ran the race of his life in the 200 metre semi-final, clocking 19.73 while slowing down before the finish line. This time was just 100th of a second outside of Petro Menea's world record, and this would surely mean he would run faster in the final if he ran through the line. As it turned out, Marsh ran a time of 20.01 in the final, enough to take the gold medal, but judging by his lack of celebration, not the kind of time he was hoping for. In contrast to Knighton, Marsh was a very proficient 100 metre runner who recorded his personal best of 9.93 during the 1992 season. This meant that running the first 100 metres in under 10.2 seconds was relatively easy for Marsh, and it didn't tax the rest of his race, whereas for Knighton to run the first 100 metres in that time, it would tax the rest of his race. In the semi-final, Marsh looked to be maintaining his top speed well as he was gliding down the home straight with ease, knowing that there is nothing at stake since he was well ahead of his competitors in qualifying for the final. In the final, he didn't run the bend as well as he did in the semi, so he didn't have the same level of momentum to maintain down the home straight. In an interview with Dave Johnson of Track and Field News, Marsh said that while trying to replicate his semi-final performance, he relaxed so much and didn't even drive out of the blocks. This shows that running the 200 metres is not a one-size-fits-all strategy, and that running the first 100 metres slower than his fitness and experience allowed him to led him to losing time that he couldn't make up later in the race. From a purely results-based perspective, Marsh's race strategy was a success since he took the gold medal, but it's an interesting question to ask if some athletes can only run their best ever races if they take the lead early in the race. Asafa Powell was known as one of the best starters in the history of the 100 metres, and because of the speed he built up over the first 50 metres, he was often able to cruise through the second half of the race, particularly while running in the preliminary rounds at championships. At the 2004 Olympics, Powell ran a time of 9.95 in the semi-final, finishing ahead of Maurice Green and Francis Obiquelu, without looking like he ever had to overexert himself. In the final, he ran an almost identical time of 9.94, but finished in 5th place with both Obiquelu and Green finishing ahead of him to take medals, running 9.86 and 9.87. At the 2008 Olympics, Powell actually ran slower in the final than he did in the semi, running 9.91 in the semi while looking completely relaxed and intentionally slowing down. But in the final, he only managed a time of 9.95, which again wasn't enough for a medal spot. At the 2007 World Champs, he ran a time of 10.01 in the quarterfinals, taking an early lead in the race, then jogging and actively decelerating in the latter part of the race. In the final, he got off to an equally good start, but only ran 500s faster, clocking 9.96, despite exerting max effort, which actually led to him stiffening up. He felt Tyson Gay on his shoulder between 50 and 60 metres, and rather than trying to maintain his own speed, he most likely tried to push himself even harder, even though this is only beneficial in the acceleration phase, which only lasts until the 60 metre mark for most athletes. Carl Lewis's coach, Tom Tellez, explains that once you reach your point of maximum velocity, trying to push to increase your speed more will actually cause you to decelerate. Therefore, your focus should be solely on maintaining the speed you have accumulated, which Carl Lewis was an expert at doing.
You reach the point where you've reached maximum acceleration and velocity. At that point, then you must relax. Relax and maintain that speed that you've developed, and you'll be able to feel this point. If you try to get more speed at this point, you will decelerate at a very rapid rate. As you approach the finish line, the idea is to try to maintain your speed and relax so that you decelerate very little.
Powell was able to put many near-perfect races together, where he executed ideal relaxation at top speed, but unfortunately for him, he didn't manage to execute his best races in championship finals, where he had fast finishers like Tyson Gay bearing down on him. Tyson is one of those athletes who never needed to rely on leading from the gun to execute his best race, which is why we've seen him run equally fast time in races where he blew away the field, and also in races where he finished in second place. One potential downside of being a strong finisher but slower starter is that he had to run close to max effort in the early championship rounds to make sure he didn't fall behind the field and lose a qualifying spot, which takes its toll when running multiple rounds as described by Atto Bolden.
He was probably more known for having to come from behind in a lot of his races. I think it's why he had so many injury problems, because sometimes even in early rounds, because he would always be at a deficit, particularly in the 100 early on, he was always kind of having to floor it to get back into contention.
As I mentioned earlier in the video, Noah Lyles is an athlete who says he has his best performances when he can feed off the adrenaline from the crowd. Something that Lyles mentioned in his 2021 US Champs post-race interview is that he summed up his best performance of the season by letting his race flow rather than trying too hard to come out aggressively and attack the race.
How to just summon the best race of the season that you needed in this Olympic trials final?
I relaxed. I stopped stressing. I let my body do what it does. No, just flow. Flow, let it come.
The following year, however, Lyles was in better shape, so he's running a more aggressive first 100 metres, and coming off the curve in the lead actually paid off for him because it allowed him to break the American record. As I mentioned for Mike Marsh earlier, this is the reason why pacing the race in accordance with what you're capable of at the time, based on your fitness level, is crucial.
And I just went. And then I caught Aaron Brown, and we start coming out of the turn. I don't sense anybody, I don't feel anybody's presence. I'm alone in this instant. I'm I guess I'm running this by myself now. About right here, last 80 meters. I was fighting for my life. Back was so arched, and I felt like I could barely lift my knees anymore.
To answer the question of how an athlete can run fast with less effort, you need to find which section of the race gives you the greatest benefit for running hard, and which section of the race you can most afford to conserve effort on, so you don't start to rapidly decelerate before reaching the finish line. This will vary depending on the athlete's abilities and the specific event, with an athlete's physical structure even factoring into how they approach and execute their races, which is something I'll be speaking about in the next video. So be sure to subscribe for our next video coming soon, and thanks for watching.